A young woman was home alone one night when she heard what sounded like screams in the next apartment. Assuming it was just some rowdy college students being loud as usual, she went about her business until she realized that the screams were actually coming from inside her own apartment. Now this story is scary enough, but here's another reason why. Just before the screaming started, she had turned off the lights and was home alone in the pitch-black darkness. Yet when she finally got the courage to turn the lights back on, she saw something terrifying. What was it? What does it mean for the rest of the story? Keep watching to find out. I remember when my son was younger, and we still lived in our apartment. He would get scared sometimes at night. We'd be sleeping in our bed, when all of a sudden he would sit up in his bed and yell, "Mommy, someone's in my closet." My wife and I would both startle and ask him things like, "What are you talking about? Who's in your closet?" He would respond by saying, "The monster? The monster is in my closet," and then he would start crying. It was always the same thing. And every time we would run over to his closet and open the door, there was nothing there. The first few times this happened, we were worried that our son had somehow developed an active imagination, or that he was losing his mind. But after it happened so many times, we started to become annoyed. We didn't have the heart to tell him that there wasn't a monster in his closet, simply because we didn't want to encourage his vivid imagination. We knew if we told him the truth, he'd probably stop believing us. And at that age, that would be a big problem. So anyway, we'd open the closet door, look inside, and reassure him that he was okay, that everything was fine. After a while, he'd go back to sleep without any problems. This routine continued on for months until one day my wife and I decided to move into a house. It took us a long time to find the right place, and so we were renting our apartment month to month. Well, one evening, my son started yelling, "Mommy, the monster is in my closet," and then he started crying. At this point, we had already found a house, but we hadn't moved yet. So we were still living in the apartment. It was about 9:30 p.m., and I figured that since we were moving the next day, it would be best to just tell him the truth. So I went over to his closet and opened the door. Sure enough, there was something in there. It was a large, hairy, disgusting creature with sharp teeth and eyes. It looked like a wild man who hadn't bathed in weeks. I screamed in terror and ran out of the room. I don't know what that thing was, but it was definitely not human. Then I heard my wife scream, "John, come quick," and I ran back into the room. When I opened the closet door again, the beast was gone. I didn't see anything else except for a pile of clothes on the floor where the monster had been hiding. I was totally freaked out at this point and wanted to call the police. But my wife stopped me and said, "You're crazy. There's no way a monster was in our son's closet." Thought maybe she was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we needed to leave that apartment immediately. We packed up what we could that night and left the rest for the next day. Didn't even bother turning on all the lights to see what else might be lurking around in the dark. That night we stayed in a hotel, and the next day we moved into our new house. I haven't thought about that incident for years now, but it still keeps me up at night thinking about what that horrible creature was doing in our son's closet. Okay, so the next story comes from a Reddit user. I was home alone one night, and I live in a very old building. As such, the wiring is really bad. Lights flicker all the time, and they frequently go out. It was late, and I was sitting on the couch watching TV, when suddenly the power went out. Not just the lights in my apartment, but it seemed like the entire building lost power. I assumed that the lights would be out for only a few minutes, so I lit some candles and went about my business. Then I heard screams in the apartment above me. I assumed it was the people from the apartment above me. They're pretty rowdy sometimes. After a few minutes, I started hearing chains dragging metal moans, and then the sound of footsteps dragging themselves closer to my apartment. I tried to ignore it, but then the sound of footsteps stopped right outside my front door. I was home alone and getting creepier by the second. So I grabbed my phone and started dialing 911. As I was on the phone with the operator, my door began to shake violently. I screamed into the phone and begged the operator to send help quickly. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything went silent again. I sat there frozen with fear until the power came back on, and I could see that the door was slightly ajar. I had never been so happy to see a closed door in my life. I locked the door and called my neighbor to see if they had also lost power. They hadn't, and I called the police to do a wellness check. They said they would, but they implied that it was probably a waste of time, and that it was most likely just some kids playing around. About an hour later, the police showed up. They asked me if anyone had been inside my apartment and if anything had been stolen. I said no to both questions, and asked them why the door was slightly open. The police checked to see if the locks had been tampered with, and then asked me if I had recently had any plumbing work done. I said yes. I had a plumber come by to fix my sink earlier that week. The police said that sometimes plumbers will leave windows and doors unlocked when they're done working. They also said that my door was damaged, and that I should get it fixed because anyone could walk in if it was kicked in hard enough. The police then apologized for wasting my time, and they left. After that, I went to my bedroom and turned on the light switch. It had been out for so long that I had forgotten that my curtains were still drawn. When I turned the switch on, a wave of relief washed over me. All the shadows in the room disappeared and I could see clearly, except I didn't see anything. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something dark moving across the room. I froze and stared at the spot where I had seen it move. Then I slowly turned my head to face the other wall, and I noticed that the light switch was already on. Okay, now it's time for the scariest part of the story. One evening, a few weeks later, I was home alone again, and the power went out once again. I lit a candle and went about my business when I heard the same dragging chains and footsteps from above. I started to panic, but I told myself that it was probably just the people from upstairs again. But as the noise came closer, I started to worry. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 again. This time, the operator calmly asked me how she could help. I explained my situation, and the operator said, "Ma'am, your call has been disconnected. Are you still there?" She must have meant to say miss, because I politely corrected her and said, "Yes, I am still here." The operator then asked me what type of emergency I was calling about. I explained to her that I was hearing scary noises and that the power was out. She said she would send someone right over. While I was still on the phone with the operator, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps dragging themselves closer to my apartment. I screamed into the phone, and the operator quickly hung up. Moments later, the sound of dragging footsteps stopped outside my front door. I peeked through my peephole and saw nothing. I waited a few moments and then slowly opened the door. Everything was fine. I stepped outside and walked down the hallway. Still nothing. I called out, "Hello, is anyone there?" But no one answered. When I returned to my apartment, I flipped on the light switch. Again, the candle had burned down and it was getting dark. And again, my curtains were drawn. I pulled them back and stared at the light switch. It was on, but that wasn't the scariest part. It was the fact that the switch had been completely dark before, but now it was glowing an eerie green. I don't know how else to describe it. It was as if an evil spirit had possessed the light switch itself. I was so terrified that I ran out of my apartment and spent the night at my friend's house. In the morning, I called an electrician to come to my apartment and see if the switch was broken or something. But the electrician said that everything looked fine. Apparently, the switch had become dislodged and was making a glowing green arc. Said that it was extremely dangerous and that I could have been electrocuted if I hadn't noticed it. That's all for today. Be sure to stay tuned for more horror stories. And if you liked the video, be sure to smash that like button. Thanks for watching.